lot earlier than the rest of us to get here for an
I do get here quite early.
Welcome, everyone, to TRW meeting this morning. Again, just to remind everybody, this is the fun committee, so we're going to have some fun, but we're going to have to kind of move a little quickly today because we have some folks in the room that are going to have to go to some other meetings. So the first thing we're going to have to do is change the order, and I apologize for that, but President of our Senate and our Majority Floor Leader both have meetings at 9. So we're going to go ahead and do the Senate File 111 first. We'll do the Senate File 118 second, and then we'll do the parimutuel wagering activities 125. We'll do that last. And then hopefully we can get through and get the Majority Floor Leader and the President of the Senate and any others that have to go to a meeting at 9. So, so with that, let's go ahead and take roll.
Senator Baldwin,
Here.
Senator Ellis,
present.
Senator Guru,
Here.
Senator Jones. Here. Chairwoman Schuler.
Here. All right, we are so fortunate to have the President of the Senate here to present Senate File 111, mule and whitetail deer separate hunting seasons. So with that, we'll turn the time over to President Driscoll.
Madam Chairman, committee, thank you. I'll try to be pretty fast. I think we can actually get all three by 9 probably. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time. This bill is a pretty lengthy bill, but it's lengthy because when you go back to early days in Wyoming when they formed the Game and Fish, 1930-something, there was basically no whitetail deer in the state of Wyoming. So deer were mule deer, and that's really all they had. And so subsequent years, whitetail deer came in. We've got 2 separate species out there that are very distinctly separate species. They're, I think, and the director will probably testify, they're not much closer related than antelope and mule deer are. They're separate species. And so we've managed in my area of the state, which is Region A general, and I think a couple others, mainly Region A, they've managed mule deer and whitetail in the same pool. So they set objectives for both herds, and then they issue a license that you can shoot either deer in. And it actually, interestingly enough, through a lot of years, worked fairly well. They've managed to kind of balance out who hunted, and through the last number of years, we've really run into some imbalances on it, and consequently, when the Wildlife Task Force met, which you've got another member here and some coming, it became an issue there, and we went through it at the task force, and the task force said, yeah, we are having trouble with mule deer statewide. Ironically, the Black Hills mule deer herd was one of the ones that was pretty resilient to the wreck, and that they said, look, why mess with it, it's working. Well, all of a sudden, since then, we've gone into decline. Our whitetail herd's in major decline. We've had EHD and blue tongue. What that's really done, when you can kill both, in the old days, they'd just come up and they'd shoot a whitetail and be happy. Well, now there's no whitetail, like on my place. So what they do is go kill a young mule deer buck, and we're just decimating our mule deer herds going forward. So I've brought this bill to split it back out. Short term, it probably has some big impacts on the outfitters in our area and some of the people that have traditionally hunted with both. For those of you that are a little older that used to get a bear tag with your elk license, it's very similar when they split those. Nobody liked it because it was always fun to shoot a bear if you saw one. Whitetail mule deer, same. Why are you taking one away from me? Long term for us, hopefully we can grow those mule deer herds. They don't tend to cause game damage near as much. Back it back into it, and also for outfitters, they'll be able to hunt 2 species instead of 1. You could actually have a non-resident hunter that has a whitetail tag and a mule deer tag. So it came out of the task force as a positive recommendation. I'm not going to speak for him, but the director's behind me. He talked, I think, favorably about it, and then we never got a bill up in front of you folks. So consequently, I've brought the bill to you. It's a policy decision, but I think it's really important if we're going to manage our game species by the North American model, not by the popularity model, is that we actually set objectives and manage each herd individually. If I run Hereford cows and black cows and I turn bulls out and say, I hope we got 50% calves, you're probably not going to have exactly that. And that's, so when we really get down to the fine management, we really ought to manage them separately. It'll cause a little upheaval short term. Long term, our deer herds on both sides will be managed better and work better. That's kind of the long and short of it. All we do is all through the bill is instead of saying deer, we do whitetail deer and mule deer. So it's just that simple. Game and Fish, by the way, I believe, and they'll testify, would still be able to basically hunt them together if they wanted to. They've got the ability to do all kinds of things with licenses. But this really makes it where they're clearly defined, and we can get them where they're actually managing herds really close. Thank you, and with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Questions for President Driscoll? Everyone's quiet. I think they're tired from last night. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
I would assume we'd probably go to our agency next. Director Nesbitt?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Brian Nesvik, Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. The good president did a good job of outlining the bill and what the bill does. I was on the wildlife task force, the task force that President Driscoll mentioned, and up front, I'll talk through some of the pros and cons, but I'll just tell you up front that at the end of the day, on the wildlife task force, I voted yes for this recommendation for two main reasons. Number one, as the president indicated, white-tailed deer and mule deer are completely separate species, and there is no other big or trophy game animals that we manage together on one license. We do that with game birds, as an example. You buy a game bird license to hunt multiple species, but we don't do that with big game or with trophy game. And so for that, very pragmatically for that purpose, and then secondly, as the president indicated as well, the commission has broad authority to address concerns that may come from splitting these two species out onto two separate licenses. The commission has a lot of authority that's given by the legislature to manage wildlife. And so I'll talk through, like I said, some of the things, the impacts that this could have, and some of the things that we've heard from sportsmen, both for and against. But at the end of the day, these concerns can be addressed by the commission if the commission so chooses. So, first of all, right now, one of the complications that we have with the current system is that the harvest surveys that we do would become easier, because you'd have a separate set of pool of survey respondents that had whitetail licenses and another pool that had mule deer licenses. As far as other benefits to this, there's potentially an increase in opportunity for sportsmen, because sportsmen would be able to, right now, under the current set of rules, through the whole process, a hunter could end up with both a white-tailed buck license and a mule deer buck license, but this would allow hunters from the get-go, from the beginning of the drawing process, to apply early for both species. That could have a consequential impact on drawing odds. You have more people in the pool, makes drawing odds go down, but that's the trade-off for having an additional opportunity there. There's some issues with landowner licenses. There's some places now where a landowner gets a landowner deer license, and we would have to figure out, in different land ownership scenarios, if they qualified for both mule deer and a whitetail landowner license, or just one or the other. Again, something that we can work through. There is some concern, particularly in the Black Hills, up in the President's District, with how the Game and Fish would incentivize folks to come when we have a lot of deer, a lot of white-tailed deer particularly. We need harvest. If right now non-residents are incentivized to come here because they can hunt mule deer, and if they don't find one, they can go shoot a white-tailed deer and go home with something. And those folks a lot of times do help us with a lot of the doe fawn whitetail harvest. So if this were to pass, Game and Fish would need to figure out how to market and sell those doe fawn whitetail licenses when we have really high populations. Again, not something that's insurmountable at all. We've had these same issues. The legislature's been hearing a lot about elk problems. So there's a lot of tools that we have in our pocket to be able to do that. I did talk with President Driscoll beforehand. The one concern I do have is this is a fairly significant change. There's a drawing that happens several months before hunting season actually happens. And so we need some time to be able to work through and implement this, change commission rules. And it is a pretty substantial change. So I did ask him to bring an amendment that would help us with that and give us a little bit more time, and I'll let him speak to the amendment when you work the bill. With that, Madam Chair, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for the director? Senator Baldwin?
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Just a quick question. I know we've talked a lot about northeast Wyoming. What I'm curious about is south central Wyoming, Saratoga area and the area in western Wyoming, where we have whitetails, are the invasive species, if you will. Under this system, are we going to be able to get the whitetail harvest where now the people have a deer license? If they see a whitetail, then a whitetail comes out of the system. But are we going to be able to manage the whitetails? Because I doubt people are going to buy a whitetail license now because there's not a lot. But if they buy a mule deer license, now they're going to shoot a mule deer and a whitetail. Are we going to be able to manage that and take more whitetails out of the system, or are they going to become more invasive?
Director?
Madam Chair, Senator Baldwin. So the issue with actually having, trying to manage whitetails is really around doe fawn harvest. And so right now in your part of the state, it's very liberal. I mean, most places in your area with a general deer license, you can harvest any whitetail through the entire season. I think that where there could be some benefits is that if people want to have, in your area, both licenses right up front, they could apply for both of them in their initial draw, as well as those additional doe fawn whitetails that are really where you manage the population. I do not see this change as hurting that in any way. It's still always going to be a challenge to manage whitetail deer in places where people don't want them. And I was a warden in Pinedale for a long time, and I remember these same discussions, the management philosophy of many was eradication. And so I get it.
Other questions? Okay, no, okay. Thank you, Director. Hope you'll hang around. Probably have some other questions as time goes on, so. Any legislators in the room that would like to testify on this bill? No? Okay. We'll just go ahead and open it up for comment. How many people are going to want to testify on this bill, just out of curiosity? Maybe raise your hands. No? Okay, we'll be all right then. Welcome. Introduce yourself, even though we probably know you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Lee Livingston, President of Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association. Also a member of the task force, served with the good president, the good majority floor leader, as well as Director Nesvik. And this was a topic that was discussed quite in length and in detail. And it makes sense. It's two different species. Back in the day, we didn't have. I remember as a kid growing up guiding, you just didn't see white-tailed deer in northwest Wyoming. And they're there now. I've got 60 of them on my place outside of Cody. And it's a little bit like bison. Bison, when I was a kid, wasn't even on the radar. You could go, if you happen to see one out of the park, you could take it any time. It has now become a huntable animal in Wyoming. Things change, things evolve, and our whitetail herds have become, quite significant in a lot of places. And it just makes sense for the management of this as a separate species, two separate species. And again, Wyoga stands behind it. It will impact some outfitters. It will impact some outfitters positively. So as a whole, the association stands behind this bill, and I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Livingston? I have just one. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Guru, Senator Guru.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lee, you talked about some of your outfitters may have some problems with this. Talk a little bit about that. When am I going to hear from the biggest detractor? Because he'll call me.
Madam Chair.
It's already ringing now. Go ahead.
Senator Guru, as the director indicated, there are some outfitters now that will book a deer hunter with a mule deer tag. It's a deer tag now. They come out with the intent of taking a mule deer and wind up not being able to take a mule deer, where I can go ahead and go clean up on a whitetail. However, like in good Senator Baldwin's area, there's a lot of excess tags available. If you want to go get a whitetail and a mule deer, basically doe fawn, you're going to be able to. So again, it's the Game and Fish could possibly, and they've navigated this before with it being one tag, two different deer, but it just makes sense overall.
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Senator Jones.
Chairman Schuler, Mr. Livingston, I just have a question. Is a mule deer, is that the better of the two? Most people want to hunt mule deer over the whitetail, or forgive me for if that's a stupid question, but I don't hunt.
Mr. Livingston.
Madam Chair, Senator Jones, it depends on the person, but yeah, mule deer, we have whitetail are prolific throughout the United States, more so than mule deer. So you have a lot of your clients coming from the eastern part of the country that grew up hunting whitetail deer, and a mule deer is their dream trophy. You know, they can kill whitetail deer all day long back there. So with, a lot of folks are coming to Wyoming for mule deer. However, because of the increase in the whitetail herds, we are starting to see some really good trophy mule deer bucks. And so we do have some folks that are targeting Wyoming for whitetail hunting.
I just have one question also for you, Mr. Livingston. Do you feel like with all the losses to the mule deer that we had last year, this bill could also negatively impact those numbers?
Madam Chair, I'd have to think on that one for a while, but I don't see that as this bill is having an impact on those losses.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
For your testimony, appreciate it. Anyone else in the room that would like to testify on this bill? Okay, anyone online? Go ahead and let him in, he or she. Welcome, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Dallas Shanks. I'm representing myself. I live out in Star Valley. I come forward with a prepared statement in opposition to this bill. Just prepared a few little points here, if you'd be so kind as to allow me that. My first point is, with the passing of this bill, quotas will have to be set for each general species. And eventually, I think it would have to set a general unit, each specific unit, to have specific quotas met. Where I live in Star Valley, Region G, it's one of the most sought after hunting destinations in the state for mule deer. We are primarily mule deer populated. We have a very, very small whitetail population, and they primarily stay down on the river, where access is really limited, especially now due to a lot of people moving into the area, buying up land on the riverfront, and then closing off access. I think with this happening, we'll have a large amount of people wanting to put in for these tags for my area. This is going to displace a lot of hunters from where we live locally. We won't be able to hunt our backyards. We won't be able to pick up whitetail tags because they are very limited in number. So we're going to have to travel and crowd someone else's backyard to be able to hunt deer. My second point is that, as has been mentioned before in testimony, the mule deer is kind of the icon of Wyoming. It's the most sought after to hunt. With having these quotas set, people are going to become frustrated with not being able to draw their preferred areas, not being able to draw behind their backyard, and they're going to ask later on to have point systems installed. Point systems are kind of a proven thing to lessen opportunities for all residents, and it virtually makes hunting impossible for our younger generations down the road, who will never be able to accumulate the number of points to draw these deer tags. We've seen this evidenced in states around us, such as Utah, sitting a little in Montana and parts of Arizona. With this, it'll essentially kill our hunting heritage due just to the lack of opportunity for young people to get out and hunt. My third point on this is that we already have separate seasons for mule deer and whitetail deer with the general tag throughout most of the state. We also have special seasons with type 3 and type 8 tags that they already have special seasons attached to them as well. And yet many of those tags are still difficult to draw, especially in my area. We only provide 25 tags for whitetail hunting. And so the reality of not being able to draw a mule deer tag, can't just put in for a whitetail and expect to get it here in Star Valley. We'll still have to travel elsewhere. I don't know why we would want to, I guess, prescribe the same thing to all of our general units that we're seeing already evidenced in our limited entry hunts with whitetail tags. Just on a personal note, I grew up here in Wyoming, specifically in Star Valley. I've taken for granted the opportunities I've had just to be able to buy deer and elk licenses just over the counter. I didn't really realize this until I had moved out of state for a short time for school. And in the 5 years that I lived in that state, I was unable to draw just a general season deer tag there as a resident because of these complicated draw systems that we have on these licenses. So if we can preserve these general over the counters as long as we can, I mean, we may not see results like this until 10, 20 years from now, but in 20 years, my 4 children are going to be my age. And I'd like them to have the same opportunities that I have currently. With that, thank you, and I stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shanks. Are there any questions for Mr. Shanks? I guess not. So thank you so very much for your testimony. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone else on Zoom? Okay. Anyone else again in the room? Last chance. Okay, with that, then we'll go ahead and close public testimony. What's your pleasure on this bill, committee? Move the bill. It's been moved by Senator Baldwin, seconded by Senator Grew. President Driscoll,
Madam Chairman,
like you might have some
either bring the
amendments.
amendments now and
This would be
run
great.
off, or,
that'd be awesome.
so these amendments were all, the first 2 anyway, were done in conjunction with the director. And so the first one is merely, I can hand these out to folks, I'm sorry.
One more?
No, you don't get one.
You were giving it to her, you were giving it to her, or me to give to her. No. Give it to me.
So the First Amendment is several areas in statute. We've got hunts that we give licenses away for. And it was unclear whether we wanted to do whitetail or mule deer licenses. So I went back to the agency and this came directly from them. So it tracks back into the bill in one of these deals. After mule deer, it says after license and up to 25 whitetail licenses. Clears it up, so that works for them. Second Amendment is actually going to get changed even more. We visited this morning. They had asked me to delay the effective date of this bill. And we had initially put in 25, July of 25. I am now asking you to make that July of 26. I don't think we're in a big hurry. I want them to have plenty of time to program rules and get people ready for the season change the way they may do it. Or if we've made some errors in it, it actually gives us a chance to back up. So effective date 26. The third one was brought up by the director, and I'm just going to throw it out and leave it to the committee. But the landowner license deal is a tough deal. I'm not sure you want landowners getting 2 licenses, and I would suggest that if there's a landowner, they're allowed to select either a mule deer landowner license or a whitetail, or preferably allow the department to have guidance in which one they could have, or give them flexibility to do it. Because sadly, in a lot of areas, and you just heard someone testify, if there's only 25 whitetail tags up there, for example, you may not have hardly any to draw from. So, my belief is we need to do it. Last part, and I'm going to sneak a little bit of testimony in here. From my end, this isn't about whitetail deer versus mule deer. This is about management and how we can actually reach herd objectives for the game and fish. If we really want to grow a mule deer herd, let's set objectives, and we'll probably make it tougher to draw a mule deer license till we get that herd built back up. But we're just never going to get built up. I can tell you whitetail are a noxious weed. My recommendation was at the Wildlife Task Force, kill all the whitetail you can so the mule deer herds can grow. Because from personal experience on my ranch, whitetail displace mule deer. They whip them all day of the week. Wherever they move in, they will end up being there, and they'll start with your irrigated bottoms and they'll move to the hills until there's nothing left but elk and whitetail deer. So I'd ask for your consideration. I'm not going to debate any of the amendments. That's, they're basically agency-driven, and we're trying to do this hand in hand with the agency. So, thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Senator Grew.
Mr. President, so what I just heard you say is, and I want to track it back to what Dallas was talking about, his concerns about, locals and so, we're trying here to manage the species and give him, this is just a short-term question, which is what the gentleman was talking about, versus a long-term solution, which is what this bill is. Do I have that right?
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you.
Other questions for President Driscoll on the amendments? Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
Madam Chair, I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. You said President Driscoll 2026.
2026 effective.
But the date that we changed it to was this effect, or the sheet that we have says it's effective July 1st, 2025. So I just want to make sure we've got your intention clear.
Yes, ma'am. I asked the department, they'd asked for 2025. I actually walked in the room, talked to the director. I said, would it be helpful to you if we went 2026? Because we're really trying not to make this disruptive. I want good policy long-term. But what I absolutely don't want to do is damage the department, make it harder to do. I also don't want to cause more of what Dallas was. We're going to have some local hunters that it's a change of what we've done. We all know when we do change, people get upset. And I want to give them all the time we can to maybe do some blended seasons or maybe do a semi-draw one year so they can figure out if it really does impact in a negative way. Because the other part you've got, we issue, I think, more deer licenses than about anywhere in the state up there. And it's critical that they are able to manage in a way they can continue to kill these whitetail, because without it, damage claims just go through the roof. And you rarely see big mule deer damage claims. You see big whitetail damage claims. So what I'm trying to do is really give us flexibility to make sure we don't make a mistake.
Any other questions for the president? Okay. Let's go ahead and, any more discussion on those amendments?
Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Madam Chair, just for purpose of discussion, I think this is how we should write bills. Look at section 2. This act is effective. There's the date. I don't think there's any doubt that Game and Fish has got a lot of work to address rulemaking and doing a lot of work to lead up to this date. In so many of our bills, we have provisions that authorize them to do rulemaking, and that's effective immediately. I just think just as a drafting, I think LSO, we've got to get back to just these cleaner, effective dates. Just my 2 cents on the drafting, but thank you.
Other discussion on the amendments? Is there a motion? Okay, Senator Grew, amendments, a second here. Okay, you've seen that you've had time to look at those enough. You're good with them? All right, all those in favor of those amendments, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? By the same? Okay, those amendments have passed. Kelly, you have a copy of those, right?
Yes, Madam Chairman. So is the effective date 2026?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
January, or excuse me, July. Okay. Yes, go ahead, Senator.
I just want to make sure. Okay, so in the amendment that we just passed to change it to July, so July 26th.
Madam Chairman, in the amendment that just passed from the attorneys, it changes January to July, so it would be July 2025. However, from the discussion, I understood the date was going to be July 2026.
Yes.
So we will amend the amendment.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
Just want to make sure, thank you. Thanks, Kelly.
thank you for that. Okay. Any other amendments? Question?
I have one more comment.
Okay, one more comment. Go ahead.
I want to throw a wrench in the works.
Okay.
Just kidding. I don't really want to throw any wrenches. Madam Chairman, I'm curious about the landowner licenses, because we discussed that, Senator Driscoll discussed that. And I was looking through the bill trying to find out where they're at in the bill, and I didn't see them. But anyway, I'm looking on page 2 where it says to promulgate rules governing the issuance of separate hunting licenses and establish separate hunting season. If that gives them enough authority to change that, or is that something that we need to change, Director?
Bet you the director has an answer for that. Go ahead, Director.
Madam Chair, Senator Baldwin, great question. So the commission does have a pretty lengthy rule right now governing landowner licenses. My point when I testified earlier was that the requirement now by the commission is that in order for a landowner to qualify for a license, they have to actually be providing habitat for the species to a level. Right now, the level is 2,000 use days per year. So the point I was trying to make is that some landowners who now qualify for just a deer license because they have 2,000 use days of deer, if this were to pass, would not qualify for one species but would for the other, and some would qualify for both. But I guess my thought on that would be is if they're providing habitat to that level for both species, then they should continue to be able to receive landowner licenses for both.
To answer your question?
That's the only wrench I've got.
Perfect. Okay. With that, I think Senator Ellis called a question on the bill, so we can go ahead and take roll.
Senate File 111, mule and whitetail deer separate hunting seasons as amended. Senator Baldwin.
Aye.
Senator Ellis. Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Jones. Chairman Schuler.
Aye.
5 ayes.
Okay, that bill is passed. Betcha. President Driscoll, would you want to carry this bill on the floor? All right, I figured that, so thank you. Thanks, everyone, for your testimony on that. All right. Well, I think he's up next, so. All right, let's move on. Again, for those of you that came late, we did change the order, so just so you know, we're going to do the Senate File 118 next. Bighorn and domestic sheep relocation, federal action. And with that, Senator Hicks, I believe, Majority Floor Leader is here, and also his counterpart. Welcome. It's good to see you represented once in a while. We haven't seen you guys for a while. We've been busy on our side. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I brought my enforcer here with me. Madam Chairman, introduction here on Bighorn domestic sheep relocation, federal action. Just a little background information on this. So in 2000, our senior U.S. Senator Craig Thomas, and at the time Governor Geringer, formed a working group to try to resolve the issues within the state of Wyoming with conflicts between domestic sheep grazing and wild sheep. And this was exacerbated by a number of actions taken by the federal government and other states. Basically, they were vacating grazing allotments associated with occupancy or forays of bighorn sheep into this. So 2000, Senator Thomas and Geringer said, we've got to get ahead of this issue. And so they formed a working group, and it took that group, and it's a very collaborative group. It involved all the stakeholders, NGOs, federal agencies, state agencies, special interest groups. And over a 4-year period, they developed what we now call the Wyoming Bighorn Domestic Sheep Plan for the state of Wyoming. So that was adopted in 2004. Since 2004, a number of actions have occurred, again, related to potential federal actions that would have had adverse consequences to domestic sheep grazers on federal lands associated with that. So the legislature in 2013 and 2015 provided some specific language legislation that they passed then that would basically similar to this if the federal agencies try to force removal of domestic sheep because of the presence of bighorn sheep, that the state of Wyoming would remove those bighorn sheep. Both of those efforts were successful. One of them was litigation against the Medicine Bow National Forest that at that time, because of this cooperative plan, the state intervened. There was a third-party litigation associated with that. But the important thing of that is the coalition, the Wild Sheep, at that time was called the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation, the domestic sheep industry, the Department of Agriculture, and the Game and Fish Department all wrote letters or in some effectuation participated in that lawsuit. Eventually, the federal courts upheld the state's plan as part of the federal land use plan. So subsequent to that, in 2015, we codified that plan into statutes. And the purpose of codifying that plan is because in any federal decisions before the courts always give a higher deference to state laws than they do agency plans. And so the idea was there is to afford additional protection to those grazing permittees on federal lands, but also provide the framework for the potential introduction of additional bighorn sheep populations around the state of Wyoming. In other words, we know how this works in Wyoming and it works well. We want to codify that. We want to give the state every opportunity to defend that plan that was cooperatively developed from 2000 and 2004. Fast forward to today, Madam Chairman, we have another issue at this point in time where we have new BLM rules that have been promulgated that again, potentially jeopardize federal land permittees, grazers, if in fact we move forward with introduction of sheep in the Bighorn Rocks, Madam Chairman. So that's the issue as we're framed up. That's the issue that we're trying to address here, is this specific issue of a potential threat associated to livestock grazers if we introduce sheep into the Bighorn Rocks, or the Sweetwater Rocks, excuse me, Madam Chairman. So with that introduction, I'll just walk you through the bill. So the bill has a series of legislative findings in there. It declares that it is the state's policy to vigorously defend its interest in maintaining and enhancing viable livestock operations in public lands while maintaining healthy populations of bighorn sheep. That the legislature finds that these policies are mutually compatible as demonstrated since the adoption of the collaborative Wyoming Bighorn Domestic Sheep Plan in 2004, further codified into law in 2005. As another finding on Romanet I, that bighorn sheep livestock grazing has continued where adjustments have been made, classes of livestock and adjustments have been voluntary and compensated. Reintroduction of bighorn sheep management actions to protect existing populations of sheep on federal lands has been effectively accomplished in conformance with the Wyoming Bighorn Domestic Sheep Plan. And we do have in statutes that wildlife are property of the state. It doesn't cite the actual citation, it just brings that in Section B. The provisions of this section shall be enforced by the state, subsection B on page 3. In conformance with the plan that the Wyoming Game and Fish Department shall relocate or remove bighorn sheep in the Sweetwater Rocks if any federal judicial action or federal agency action requires or could require the following. And those following are the elimination or suspension of domestic sheep grazing or trailing. Madam Chairman, go over to page 2. Another trigger would be a reduction of any class of livestock animal unit months of grazing directly attributable to the interactions or competition with bighorn sheep. Subsection C, any relocation or removal of bighorn sheep from the Sweetwater Rocks would commence starting 6 months after any of these federal actions, within 6 months. Subsection D just provides that the department would be reimbursed for the cost of relocation or removal of those sheep. Also provides some funding in the Wildlife Livestock Disease Partnership account to do disease surveillance and monitoring. Subsection E gets into a component where, with the approval of the governor, the Attorney General, which this is a little different than some of the other language had in the past, again, to afford maximum protection to defend Wyoming's plan and also those public land permittees out there. So the Attorney General shall seek to intervene or file an amicus brief in any lawsuit filed in a state or federal court against any Wyoming citizen, grazing permittee, company, or business that could be negatively impacted according to the state's policy regarding the bighorn sheep domestic sheep plan. Subsection F, again, with the approval of the governor, the Attorney General could file action against a federal agency in any state or federal court to stop enforcement and administration or implementation of any federal agency rule, instructional memo, handbook, or other action by a federal agency if, in the Attorney General's judgment, the rule or instructional memo, handbook, et cetera, is inconsistent with the Wyoming Bighorn Domestic Sheep Plan. We go down to Section 2. Madam Chairman, Section 2 comes in, and this creates, or the existing Wyoming Livestock Disease Research Partnership. And it just says that the board shall allocate funds to monitor the tracking and conduct disease surveillance of bighorn sheep. 1119-603 it creates the account. Section 3, it also appropriates $100,000 to that account for the purposes of reimbursing the department for the surveillance, the monitoring, or removal of the bighorn sheep. Subsection B appropriates $50,000 to the Wyoming Department of Agriculture for the Rangeland Health Assessment Program to conduct rangeland monitoring on BLM allotments in and adjacent to the Sweetwater Rocks. Madam Chairman, that's the bill. Madam Chairman, I do have a few amendments that I would like to track in when the committee is ready to entertain those.
Any questions for Majority Floor Leader?
Madam Chair, we got the handout. Is this yours?
No.
Okay. And then, Madam Chair, one follow-up question. I see that the bill would take immediate effect, and it looks like Game and Fish would play a pretty integral role in enforcing this. And so I'm wondering if they could use, if you talk to them about whether or not they need time for some rulemaking, and if July 1st, 2024 would be a better effective date.
Madam Chairman.
Majority Floor Leader?
That's exactly one of the proposed amendments I have. There's nothing here that could not be effective until July 1st of 2024.
Okay. Other questions for the Majority Floor Leader? How about Representative Western? Do you have some testimony you'd like to add?
Chairwoman Schuler, thank you very much. I think the Majority Floor Leader, he's been involved in this for quite a long time and did a really good job covering it. The only thing I would tack on is, if you'll recall to last session, there was quite a bit of banter about the bonus points bill, right? About certainly in regards to these trophy game and bighorn sheep. And I fought it vigorously, largely because that would have negatively impacted a certain cohort that I might be a member of. But my point is this. That idea was, it was a zero-sum policy, right? For one group over here to gain, this group over here had to lose. This bill presents a net positive option in that entire debate. Saying, why don't we just grow the size of the pie? If we can even add 5, 10 more tags to be allocated for the draw pool over the years, that's a really big success story. And that's why I think where this fits into that whole dialogue is, this is an option for hunters to have more tags potentially to hunt. So that's one of many reasons that I think this is a really good bill, and one more to help to put this bill in context. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions from the committee? Go ahead, Senator Baldwin.
Just a quick question. Do you know, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, how many grazing permits or lease lot are in the Sweetwater Rocks area? For sheep specifically, not for cattle. There's a lot of rattlesnakes in there.
Here, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, it's my understanding there is no active domestic sheep grazing allotments in the cooperative review area. There is domestic sheep grazing allotments directly adjacent to the cooperative review area. And so that's the impetus that if they foray over there, and then for whatever reason, the federal government wanted to take an action. And there's some other provisions in here that we'll talk about to try to resolve some of those potential issues too. But as I understand it, there is no active domestic sheep grazing allotments. And maybe somebody else could answer that question. But to my knowledge, there is not any within the cooperative review area for the Sweetwater Rocks right now.
Along with that question, I had one also. Whereabouts does the Sweetwater Rocks area, where does it go from where to where? I was going to try and look it up. I have no idea. I kind of have an idea, but if you could kind of give
So
me
just to give you a broad context, Madam Chairman, so if you're familiar with Split Rock, so that would kind of be the southeast corridor, and if you go all the way up just outside of Jeffrey City and Devil's Gate, up in that area, is basically, it's that series of large granitic formations that kind of run through there in that area.
Other questions for the Majority Floor Leader or Representative Lester? Okay. We'll go ahead and, do you want to do your amendments in just a shake, or do you need to do them now so you can leave? I know you've got a meeting
Madam
coming
Chairman,
up.
that's entirely up to you. I
first,
can
I
walk
guess,
you through
well-
the amendments, and then you can take public comments on the amendment too, if that's,
That-
and there is some additional copies over there, although they don't track in real well, but.
I think that'd be
So,
just
and I've
great.
got some others that are some conforming changes, Madam Chairman, so, but if you'd like to do that, then,
Let's go ahead and we'll do it a little out of order, but I think that's great because I know you have meetings, so.
yeah. So, Madam Chairman, if you go into page 1, line 4, where it says Sweetwater Rocks Herd Unit, to be consistent with the plan, we should call that the Sweetwater Rocks Cooperative Review Area. And that will be conforming all the way through the bill, because there's a number of areas where we reference their Sweetwater Rocks herd unit. We bring in the Sweetwater Rocks Cooperative Review Area. So, does staff have that? Yep. So, Madam Chairman, so right after Sweetwater Rocks, we would delete herd unit and insert that language.
Senator Guru, you have a question?
I just want to make sure. We're tracking you with this.
No, I'm
No.
not working on it.
Okay. So this, so
I'm
that's,
working
well, I
off-
know that's what you asked, but then when he started talking, it's tracked with this.
I'm gonna work off of the bill.
Okay,
Okay.
that works.
Got it.
Page 1, line 4. So, delete herd unit, insert cooperative review area. Madam Chairman, page 2, line 9. After conservation, strike protection and expansion of the free ranging. So strike the balance of that line. And then we would add the language that says after conservation and maintaining healthy populations of, or, excuse me, Madam Chairman, and maintenance of healthy bighorn sheep. So, and maintenance of healthy.
Kelly, you doing okay with that? Okay.
So now we're down to line 10. Bighorn sheep population should be plural, so we need to add an S to that. Strike throughout and insert in. So that will now read, in conjunction with conservation and maintenance of healthy bighorn sheep populations in the state of Wyoming. Madam Chairman, page 2, line 17 through 23, strike all of Romanet I.
Got that? Romanet I.
Madam Chairman, page 3, line 17. Before bighorn, insert the word all. And then after Sweetwater Rocks, strike the herd unit 2 and insert cooperative review area, conforming. Page 3, line 18. Strike the language, another area of the state. Staff, we got that?
Got that, Kelly?
All right, Madam Chairman, page 3, line 23. After sheep grazing, strike or and insert a comma. And then after trailing, insert or and include lambing. An additional language within or adjacent to the Sweetwater Rocks Cooperative Review Area.
I didn't get that last part.
So
After
after
lambing.
lambing, so we're gonna have, so it'll be domestic sheep grazing, comma, trailing, or lambing within or adjacent to the Sweetwater Rocks Cooperative Review Area.
Madam Co-Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
I know I asked the majority floor leader if this, so far it's tracking.
Word for word.
Word for word. I don't know
Well,
where
it
this came
won't.
from or where these amendments came
It
from.
won't.
Yes, Senator Greer.
Apologize, Senator, but this is fairly complicated and it's tracking word for word. And so we're trying to stick with you and make sure we get it right. But so forgive us our naivety on this, but we're just doing our best. So thanks.
Madam Chairman, just hang and rattle here with me for a minute, 'cause we're gonna take a deviation from some of that. So, Madam Chairman, this is where we're gonna start to deviate just a little bit. So we're on page 4. So you would strike all the language in Romanet 2. And then, Madam Chairman, you have a handout here that shows B Romanet 2. Staff, that would be the language that we would insert there.
I don't have that.
Right here.
Thank you. I thought that was yours.
Nope.
Sorry, I got it.
Do we have that?
Kelly, have you got that?
Yes, Madam Chairman, that's subsection B, Romanet 2.
Yep.
Okay.
Strike the language in the current bill and insert this language. All right, Madam Chairman, the next one again is subsection C, conforming amendment on line 9 to change Sweetwater Rocks herd unit to cooperative review area. Madam Chairman, if we go down to line 11, after the, strike the balance of all of the rest of line 11, the rest of line 12, and the rest of line 13. And then you have the new language here, which will now read, starting on line 11, not later than 6 months after the Wyoming Department of Agriculture certifies to the governor that the conditions specified in subsection B have been met. The governor shall notify the Wyoming Game and Fish Department that removal of bighorn sheep from the Sweetwater Rocks Cooperative Review Area shall commence. Madam Chairman, we would have a new, after that, a new subsection D. And you have that in your language on the proposed amendment here. And this would bring in a new subsection D that says the Wyoming Game and Fish Department shall be responsible for the expedient removal of bighorn sheep that foray outside of the Sweetwater Rocks Cooperative View area, so long as that foray is not into another designated herd unit. That's pretty much the policy of the department right now already, but it just puts it in here as to follow the policy, and the director can speak to that when we get here. So then it would just be to renumber those. We've added a new D, so we'd have to renumber. Madam Chairman, we're on to page 5, line 3. It says negatively impact, so we would make that negatively impacted. So impact would be impacted by federal actions contrary to. Oh, Madam Chairman. line
Kelly?
2, after
that?
could, should be, insert the word be. So it would read, if we start at line 2, it will see grazing permittee, company or business that could be negatively impacted by federal actions contrary to the state's policy regarding.
Get that? Okay.
Madam Chairman, page 5, line 9, after general, insert the word, or delete may and insert shall.
Line 9. May into a shall. Okay.
Madam Chairman, page 6. Line 8. After the word surveillance, insert prior to and following introduction. So they would conduct a disease surveillance of any sheep that were going to be brought in, and then after they're brought in, they would still conduct a disease surveillance. I think that's, we can ask the director again, but I think that's consistent with department policy. And then on 9, we'd bring in the conforming language of cooperative review area, delete herd unit, and bring in the conforming language there. Madam Chairman, page 7, line 15. Again, we'll bring in conforming language, and so in this case, we would strike management and insert cooperative review area. And then, Madam Chairman, consistent with Senator Ellis's recommendation would be to change the effective date from July 1st from immediately to July 1st, 2024, in section 4. Madam Chairman, that's all the proposed changes. I'd stand for any questions on those changes.
Questions, committee, on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it looks like someone wrote this for us and that they've maybe reached out to you and they've got a preference for all of these amendments. You've agreed to maybe some of them. I guess I'm just wondering what's kind of going on behind the scenes, just to help us understand this. That was a lot of amendments.
So, Madam Chairman, there is tremendous ramifications to people's livelihoods if we don't get this right. This issue has been unresolved for a couple of years now between the actions of the federal government, the permittees, the desire from the state to increase and reintroduce bighorn sheep around the state. So they kind of become at loggerheads. In December, through the domestic bighorn sheep working group meeting that's held every year, normally up in the central part of the state, there was a discussion that this might provide a path forward. So that occurred, I want to say mid-December, if my recollection at that time. So this is a alternative that we've used in the past that hadn't been explored. So what we're trying to do now is we've had a number of meetings with different organizations, permittees, different conservation groups, discussions with the department. So I received those suggested changes to the bill from the Wool Growers Association Sunday afternoon late. Well, obviously, we all know where we were till 11 o'clock last night doing the budget. So what I've done is try to look through all those, and the ones that I think are consistent with the plan and make sense in the arena of cooperative working together, trying to forge something that the majority of the people can coalesce around, is to address those. And some of those they're just clarifications, or they're just providing additional reassurances. I don't think any of those that we've adopted here substantively change the intent of the legislation. So to answer your question, this is a little bit dynamic right now. Again, trying to give everybody maximum opportunity to weigh in on this issue. So I hope that helps address your question, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the wool growers, I was just curious.
Other questions for the majority floor leader on the amendments or the bill or Representative Wester? Okay. We need to go ahead and probably open it up for public comment. Thank you for those amendments and for all your work on it. And we'll go ahead and open it up for public comment. Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So the majority floor leader did a great job of outlining the background. I'll add a couple more details here specific to current department policy and some of the current actions that are ongoing with the department related to this issue. So 3 to 4, my recollection is a little fuzzy, but 3 to 4 years ago, the commission received a proposal in accordance with the current Wyoming domestic wild sheep plan to reintroduce sheep into the Sweetwater Rocks. That's really what is the most recent effort or proposal that brought all of this to where we are today. The commission has been considering that proposal for that amount of time without finalizing any kind of a decision, because there has continued to be concerns from livestock producers, not just sheep producers, but livestock producers in this immediate area that are concerned about what this might mean for their livelihoods, as the good majority floor leader indicated. So really, at the end of the day, what this bill does is it provides durable, predictable assurances as a tool for the department if sheep were to be reintroduced or if they were to end up there on their own. There is a sheep herd that's directly south of this area, and certainly that's a possibility. So this is about assurances. There's nothing in this bill that directs the department tomorrow or July 1st, if this is amended and passed, to go out and introduce sheep into the Sweetwater Rocks. There's a lot of steps, including disease protocols, including continuing to work with producers. I committed early on that we would not move this as a recommendation to the commission until we addressed those concerns they had with assurances to make sure that federal actions wouldn't impact their grazing allotments and the number of AUMs they have, the standards and guidelines they have to follow. And in fact, I issued a letter probably 3 years ago, really well aligned with this bill. I told those producers that if we did reintroduce sheep, and that, I'll just quote exactly what I said in the letter, should bighorn sheep be used as a surrogate by federal land managers to adjust allotment stocking rates or otherwise reduce livestock grazing in the Sweetwater Rocks Cooperative Review Area, the Game and Fish will remove the sheep. So we've been committed to this concept, but obviously there's not a lot of durability in a letter that's signed by the director of the Game and Fish. Directors come and go, and certainly statute provides the most durable commitment to those producers and provides, I think, another tool to help us move forward with having some more sheep in a really cool part of the state. As the majority floor leader indicated, our current policy now is we have sheep herds, wild sheep herds around the state, and oftentimes, especially young rams, they're like other young males of other species. They'll wander and foray away from where they're supposed to be, and when that happens, and there's a risk of any kind of contact with domestic sheep or disease transmission concerns, we remove those sheep. And on an annual basis, there's several around the state, a handful that we remove on an annual basis to make sure that we stay in alignment with this plan. One thing nobody's mentioned yet, this plan that we have in Wyoming is the envy of other states. And trying to work really hard to maintain the integrity of this plan and the functionality of the plan, I think, is really in everybody's best interest, regardless of whether you're a livestock producer, or whether you're a wildlife lover, or just a sheep hunter. Keeping that plan intact and functional is, I think, vital to the future of managing both domestic and wild sheep. And I could certainly talk. This is a complicated issue. It's been going on a long time. I can talk a lot of details. I can answer a lot of questions, but I think that a lot of the background and the key components of what's included in this legislation has been outlined. And so I will, with that, stop and stand for any questions.
Questions for Director? Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I apologize to the committee and everybody. I have to go in just a minute, but I just have one question. The amendment that we just tracked through with the good majority floor leader, does the commission go along with that?
Director?
Madam Chair, Senator Drew, yes.
Thank you.
That was the question that I was going to ask, so thank you. Any other questions for the director?
Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Maybe a little more pointed of a question. On the mays versus shells in filing litigation, my experience is that the executive branch doesn't like being told what to do. I think they prefer having mays and having that discretion. So I am wondering if that's something you've run up the flagpole to the governor.
Director?
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, absolutely. I wouldn't be comfortable speaking to that. That's Attorney General and the governor's prerogative, but I will certainly flag that for the governor's office to make sure they know.
Any other questions for the director? Okay, thank you again. Appreciate all your history and the background on this. I know it's been around a while, so. All right, other public testimony. Please introduce yourself.
Yes. Good morning, Madam Chairwoman Schuler and members of the committee. My name is Katie Cheesebro. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation. The Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation is an original signatory to the Wyoming Plan and has been a member of the Domestic Bighorn Sheep Interaction Working Group for over 20 years. And as such, we are committed to working with our agricultural partners toward the Interaction Working Group's goal of maintaining healthy bighorn sheep populations while sustaining an economically viable domestic sheep industry. We feel this bill meets the Interaction Working Group's goal. However, this bill does not determine whether or not bighorn sheep are reintroduced into the Sweetwater Rocks, as the director said. So we really feel that this bill is providing legally defensible protections to federal grazing permits affecting the Sweetwater Rocks proposed reintroduction area should bighorn sheep be reintroduced, or if they do in fact migrate there naturally. We feel it's a good faith effort to protect our agricultural partners and create a landscape that fosters the coexistence of agriculture and wildlife into the future. We feel that this bill also strengthens the Wyoming Plan and the local collaborative power that Interaction Working Group has. We're curious if this bill doesn't go through, really how and where the Wyoming Plan can work. And we want to keep that a strong system and collaborative group that has local, state level impacts. So that's important to us as well. And lastly, we really feel that this creates a framework for a Wyoming solution to a Wyoming issue that considers the needs of both agriculture and wildlife. I want to also say what this bill does not do, because I think there's a little bit of confusion. It does not set precedent. Similar bills, as Senator Hicks has mentioned, have been enacted twice before and have been effective. They provided protections to ag producers while having actually no consequence to bighorn sheep populations. Wyoming's bighorn sheep are already legislatively managed under the Wyoming Plan. And then I did want to address some of Senator Hicks' amendments. I have not been privy to those, and it was a little hard to track. But I would like to ask what the legal definition of the Sweetwater Rocks Cooperative Review Area is. I have not heard that at this point in time. I've only seen the larger map of the Cooperative Review Area, which contains the Ferris Seminole herd. That's one of our healthiest bighorn sheep herds in the state, and I don't think that should be subject to the removal should there be impacts to federal grazing permits in the Sweetwater Rocks area. So maybe a question for later. I know that the Sweetwater Rocks herd unit is a historic, legally defined area. But yeah, just some specificity there would make us a little more comfortable. And also, we'd like to see greater specificity on the area where these grazing protections are valid. And Senator Hicks's amendments covered that, but again, use the term Sweetwater Rocks Cooperative Review Area rather than the Sweetwater Rocks herd unit. So I'm sure perhaps that is defined somewhere. I'm just not aware of it. So yeah, with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Cheeseborough? Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Madam Chair, Ms. Cheeseborough, could you tell me how far apart those two areas they're talking about, the Sweetwater Rocks and then, did you say Seminole?
Yep. So, Madam Chair, Senator Jones, the Ferris Seminole herd actually isn't very far from there. I couldn't tell you mileage-wise. I don't have that number on the top of my head. But as Director Nesvik said, it is directly south, and they are separated by a highway that they seem to not want to cross, and I don't blame them. but that's how far apart they are. So this is kind of a natural place for them to be. And I think they since there have been removals of bighorn sheep from the area in the past to cover that protocol under the Wyoming plan, it's habitat they'd like to be in.
Any follow-up? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Others in the room that would like to testify on this bill? Come on up. We can bring up 2 or 3 at a time if you'd like. Please introduce yourselves.
Madam Chairman, Keith Kennedy for the Wyoming Wool Growers, and to my right, Allison Crane, their Executive Director, as well as Liz Phelp, producer from the area. First of all, to address a couple of questions that have been posed earlier regarding separation of powers and the shall statement, our feeling was that the clause right before that, with the approval of the governor, gives that latitude to the executive branch once the governor has the freedom to make that decision. And with that, I'll pass it off to Allison to address some of the area issues.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so I believe you have this map now. So this actually is from the Monteith study that was completed by the Monteith group from UW. And this actually defines that Bighorn Sheep Cooperative Review Area with that bold black outline. And as you can see, there are a few active sheep allotments that do flow into that defined cooperative review area. So that Alkali Creek sheep, Arapahoe Creek, and the Marton just barely comes across that border. There's also some privately owned land that are some small flock operators in that area that are actually inside the cooperative review area, but not running on public lands. And then also there's an authorized sheep grazing allotment that is not actively in use. And that's that Whiskey Peak.
One of our biggest concerns is the fact that that BLM can certainly use this at any time when any of these permittees are going to renew their allotment. And as we've seen from the BLM Manual 1730, if there are bighorn sheep in the area, BLM will impose conditions on those permits. And while we definitely appreciate this effort, and we had a large part in those amendments that you saw from the majority floor leader, it still doesn't provide ultimate protection, because BLM, with the presence of bighorn sheep on their lands, can alter the terms of any permit renewal for any of these permittees, whether they be sheep operators or cattlemen. And that's our primary reason for our concern with this bill. We also have another amendment that we would like to discuss a bit later, but we also feel that right now is probably the best opportunity that we've had for any type of federal action within the last 5 years. As you may know, the Farm Bill is up for renewal again, and there is a reasonable chance that it will get passed this year, and that's probably our best opportunity to have some sort of rider that would fix this at the federal level. And with that, I will pass this off to my counterparts.
Yes, so one of the biggest asks that from wool growers, the domestic sheep industry in the state, that we've had is just asking for lasting legal assurances, whether that's at the state level, but especially at the federal level, as my counterpart just mentioned. And one of the biggest concerns that we do have is that when these sheep are introduced on private land, the NEPA process does not get opened up. And then when these sheep, bighorn sheep, wander onto the BLM. Once these grazing permits have to be renewed, then NEPA will open up and all of that liability falls onto the producer, whether that is a sheep or a cattle producer. And so a lot of the concern is actually coming from the cattle side of the industry, although we are concerned still as sheep producers too. So we've held a lot of public meetings since our interactive working group in December. And that has been largely the concern. But with that, we are in support of this bill, but with some of these amendments, with the dependency on this federal legislation, because we do need that at a federal level, even with this protection that is so greatly appreciated from across the state. But we do need that. Trying to make sure I cover everything. Would you like to say something? I don't know if that one's on.
My name is, is it, okay, there we go, green light. My name's Liz Phil, and we have the grazing allotment, the Gas Hills, and our main ranch is out at Lysite, which is about 40 miles north of there, but we trail our sheep out there every summer, and we lamb there, and we stay until we lamb the end of May and stay until the middle of December, and then trail them back to Lysite. And one of my fears is that the BLM will not allow us to range lamb out there anymore. They've discontinued, or in Colorado, there are 9 sheep allotments where they removed range lambing from in the terms and conditions of their permit. Our permit expires in 2028 out there. And it just seems onerous on the people trying to make a living out there, the federal overreach sort of. And so it's very concerning. Thank you.
And I'll just add to that as well, that if you're familiar with what's going on with the Rock Springs RMP, it just seems like we're opening ourselves up to federal overreach on those BLM lands as they're taking away lambing and a lot of the seasonal grazing access through that RMP. So it does seem like an opportunity for that to just happen again. And I'll just go ahead and mention there's an error through one of the proposed amendments by Senator Hicks on that B Roman numeral II on page 4. It states any changes to United States Bureau of Land Management Grazing Allotment Management Plan, AMP. That would be the Resource Management Plan, RMP.
Could you state that again, where that is?
On page 4. And it's on his promote, do you have this one right here? It's that top amendment, so B Roman numeral II. And where it says allotment management plan, I believe that's supposed to say resource management plan.
Madam Chair?
Yes, questions?
So I'm struggling with that too. Any changes to the U.S. Bureau of Land Management Resource Management Plan, those are the overarching big plans, and they don't do them with great regularity. Then, then there's separate NEPA actions that occur within that plan. And so I don't know if resource management plan quite gets at it either. I think there's the RMP and some subsequent federal action that might affect the grazing. So I don't know that verbiage though, right off the top of my head, but this isn't right either, to me. If I'm wrong, please push back, but I think resource management plan isn't enough.
Any other comments or?
And
Yes, go
Madam
ahead.
Chairman, one final comment, and many of our members have some concerns that this is something that might force the BLM's hand rapidly if there was a relocation that happened. And we also, before you, you have a proposed amendment number 2 that would strike immediately upon and insert only upon certification of the governor to the Secretary of State that the federal government has enacted legislation that conforms with Wyoming Statute 11-19-601. And that's a concern that many of our members have expressed to us in meetings that we've had over the last couple of weeks. And I realize that those are often hard lifts and not done very often. So with that, we'd welcome any of your questions.
Questions for any of the folks? Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Just a quick question. Looking at the map that you gave us, and I noticed in the changes that we made, where we changed from herd unit to cooperative review area, it was Sweetwater Rocks Cooperative Review Area. And this map includes the Ferris and the Seminole. So I'm assuming the Sweetwater Rocks is a sub piece of that. Would that not be correct?
That's my understanding. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, other questions? Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know I'm just trying to chug as much coffee. I'm not following you on why you have a preference for a trigger enactment rather than a state certain. One more time.
Do you want to take it?
Whoever wants to answer, feel free.
So once these sheep, bighorn sheep, go on to BLM lands, even with state protection, it probably will not be enough, because BLM could come back, and even if the state removes those bighorns from BLM lands, they will say that that has now become bighorn habitat, even with the sheep removed. And so they could come back and say, that's now suitable habitat for a bighorn sheep, put sheep back. That's our fear. And this is our fear because it's happened. And so we currently have producers in the Uinta Cache area, Ashley National Forest, that had agreements with Forest Service in writing, and that's what we appreciate, the director's comments on that, where it's directors come and go. And that's why we need statute, but we also need it at the federal level too, because the BLM can very easily choose to not acknowledge state statute.
If there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Anyone else? We're kind of running short on time. We've got one more bill, so I would say keep everything pretty short and sweet. We've got to have at least about 30 minutes for our other bills, so. But welcome, introduce yourselves.
See how quick I can go. Jess Johnson, Government Affairs Director of the Wyoming Wildlife Federation. We do stand in support of this bill. We also sit on the working group, and I'm relatively newer to it. And the couple meetings that I did get in and get my foot in the door for, I was impressed at the level of conversation that happens, and the fact that the majority floor leader saw an opportunity here to move us forward in some of this. We're very, very grateful. So very grateful to the majority floor leader, very grateful to the members of that group for these kinds of discussions. A couple of things that I just wanted to touch on, that as we are moving forward, this state statute is part of a larger package of our outreach to work together with ag. I think there has been discussions of a MOU with BLM signed, which again, can change with administration, but it does add that level of protection. We were very, very, very happy about the director's letter from Director Nesvik. I think that's another, just puts it on there. So we're adding the state statute. Some of the reason that we feel like this is so important right now is that state statute is enacted much faster. I don't need to belabor how long the feds take to get legislation through. And feds rarely, if ever, likely never, do large acting statute on 73,000 acres of land for the whole country. They're not going to look at this in that way. And so we're trying to split the issue of we are here to help protect our partners at the table. We want to talk about grazing allotments. We want big ag in our state because that's most of the habitat. And we really, really support that. So looking at how we can say, yes, let's look at larger state level stuff. Sure, but if for this, and this one specifically, we're not going to have federal legislation that touches on just a tiny little piece of land. So if we need a bigger discussion, we should have that. This one, and why we brought the state statute and why we stand in support of it, is because it enacts quickly. It is a Wyoming solution, so it's us fixing problems. You know, wildlife usually should be managed by the state. We have a couple exceptions, maybe the toothier ones that we're a little frustrated about, but certainly by the state. And some of this coverage is that as sheep come out, and if they do move, you know, yeah, the Fair Seminole is close. And this state statute covers them should they wander into the area too, which they haven't yet, and we sort of hope they don't in that sense. But if they do, this covers it and this protects them as well. So this is just that added thing. And the final little bit that I would say is that certainly there has been constraints in past around grazing allotments. This is such a major issue, and we really, really, you know, I think heartily sympathize and want to protect what is out there. But the Forest Service and the BLM are very different agencies, and it is a very different statutes and processes that they go through to deal with a lot of this. And so our ask on this is you know, making sure that the statute gets through, that we get these protections on the ground, and then we can then go back and have these bigger, larger conversations of what else needs to happen. But this seems to be the one that we need now quickest to get the protection on the ground. And it is a Wyoming solution. It can happen now, and we can do it better than the feds.
We're just going to keep moving on because we're short on time, so go ahead. And then we'll ask questions for the group.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. I will try to be brief, but I will be very honest. This is a complex issue, and the devil is in the details on this one. And I think we have, my apologies, Sabrina King, representing the Wyoming chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We have a little bit of a different take on whether or not this is a precedent-setting bill and the implications of this bill on our wildlife management policies, but also, frankly, in comparison to what we've done historically. And in the interest of time, we'll give just one example, but if you go back and you look at the 2013 bill and also the 2015 bill, those were almost exclusively appropriations, which is one tiny section of this bill. And, for example, in the 2013 bill, it says that the sheep will be removed if a final federal judicial or agency action, including all appeals, requires the elimination or suspension of any domestic sheep grazing. In the Sierra Madre portion, that was what that bill was about. If you come to this bill, and just one example of sort of the broad-reaching nature of this, if you go to page 3 down on line 19, we're talking about mandatory removal of all bighorn sheep from this area if any federal judicial action or federal agency action requires or could require the following. And then you have a laundry list of things that could potentially happen. They don't even have to have happened. Nothing has to have happened, and you are mandating in this bill the removal of bighorn sheep. In addition to that, none of the previous legislation mandated any kind of intervention or filing of lawsuits in any state or federal courts. And I think to go back to the point of, the shall versus may and requiring lawsuits, I think at that point you're making it a political decision of the governor, which is problematic. If the governor then has to make a decision about do we file or do we not, you're putting a sort of target on the governor's back and having to make that decision. And I would also point to the subsection E, starting on page 4, line 21, that the Attorney General shall seek to intervene or file an amicus curiae brief in any lawsuit filed in any state or federal court in Wyoming or filed against any Wyoming citizen, federal grazing permittee, company, or business that could be negatively impacted by federal action contrary. Well, I mean, that would be the proposed amendment to the state's policy regarding bighorn domestic sheep set forth in subsection A, which is the findings. So if any person could potentially have anything negative done to them based on legislative findings, we're now mandating that the governor's office and the resources of the state of Wyoming are getting involved. That's why the devil is in the details in this bill. Additionally, I would say some of the proposed amendments, including, the proposed amendment on page 2, on line 9, this currently reads, that the findings of the state are to defend our interests in the conservation, protection, and expansion of free-ranging bighorn sheep. Well, now it would be conservation and maintenance of bighorn sheep. We're not even saying that we want to expand our bighorn sheep populations. And for our members, there are elements of this bill that we could support, but if it allows us to expand the population of bighorn sheep that we would be able to hunt in the state of Wyoming. So I think for all intents and purposes, I think, and I emailed committee members with sort of several proposed amendments, including taking a lot of the shalls to mays, and it sounds like other folks want it to go in the opposite direction. But from our perspective and from our membership's perspective, this bill goes so much further than anything else we have ever done in terms of reintroduction of bighorn sheep. And yes, the politics of the issue have changed and there's some issues on the federal level, but I think you've heard, we can pass this bill and they're still gonna fight to get the federal legislation passed anyway. So I have a lot of questions about what we are doing in our state statutes as it pertains to management of wildlife and reintroduction of bighorn sheep in the interest of getting this done, which our members would really love to see happen, and how much further we are going than we have ever gone before. So with that, I would stand for any questions.
Go ahead, we'll introduce yourself. Again, if we can just keep it about 2 minutes,
Understood.
we're running
Thank
out
you.
of time.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, I am Matt Hubler. The goal for bighorn sheep reintroduction is not just to put wild sheep back onto the mountain in their native ranges, but rather to change the narrative that bighorn sheep are the catalyst for demise for the ag industry. Just as I spoke at the 2021 Wyoming Game and Fish Commission, and quoting from a letter I co-authored for this exact reintroduction, I say, quote, "Any management decision that pits bighorn sheep against domestic livestock shall be resolved in favor of the domestic grazing interest." End quote. We've been on this same track for 3 years now. In transforming this narrative, the opposition that's been shared with those of us supporting this reintroduction has ironically not been about bighorn sheep at all. You've heard the distrust for the federal government, specifically the Bureau of Land Management in this case, who administers the livestock grazing permits. If bighorn sheep on the range were the issue, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Why are there active BLM grazing allotments throughout the state overlapped by bighorn sheep herds? Currently, like the Ferris Seminole, Devil's Canyon, Laramie Peak. It's a long list within the state of Wyoming. And second, whether wild sheep ever roam the Sweetwater Rocks again, is that distrust for the federal government going to change? From my time as Director of Operations at Pathfinder Ranches, where we held 21 BLM grazing permits, 5 of them with healthy bighorn sheep herds on, I went through 7 permit renewals, and not once was bighorn sheep mentioned. What was mentioned was it was well understood that if I wanted to improve my standing with the BLM, that I would improve my rangeland resources throughout my grazing allotments. When bighorn sheep return to the Sweetwater Rocks, with them come hundreds of thousands of dollars for tasks like spraying cheatgrass, water and spring developments, predator control, miles and miles of new fencing that you don't have to fix the next year. And again, the list goes on and on. In my current time on the board of directors for Wyoming Wild Sheep, we have a grant and aid program that distributes $100,000 to $150,000 every year for habitat projects in Wyoming. We have a national office with a similar effort and even more money for range and habitat improvements. If federal land grazing lessees need a sense of protection, this bill accomplishes it. No federal legislation is needed. This is a state issue of a state wildlife species and is a state solution. If the grazing lessee needs to bulletproof their allotment through water development and range improvements, let the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation and our partners help pay for it. There is an outcome here where wild sheep again roam the Sweetwater Rocks, where livestock allotments are enhanced, fears are minimized, and the narrative that wild sheep are the downfall instead shows an enrichment of Wyoming. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee for any one of the 3? All right, thank you for your testimony. Again, we're running out of time. We've got one more bill. Is there anybody else in the room? We're gonna have to keep it really short. I know we have a few Zoom folks, don't we? How many?
Madam Chairman, we have a few people on Zoom, but no one has raised their hand.
Okay,
Oh, we have Laura Pearson raised
Okay.
and Ken Hamilton. Ken?
Good morning, members of the committee. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Please introduce yourself, and we're going to have you keep it really short because we have one more bill yet. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank
ahead.
you, Madam Chair. Ken Hamilton with the Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I'd just like to comment that our members in that area, including one of our board members, is very against this piece of legislation. And part of it is because of some of the reasons that were raised by the wool growers. But I think one of the things that I would just throw out is this seems to be a very specific piece of legislation. I'm kind of curious about the constitutionality of it. Article 3, I think Section 27 for specific pieces of legislation. Number 2 is I think that this bill talks about the protection of the domestic sheep that are in the area. But if at some point some people want to expand into the area, I don't think that there's anything that addresses that. I would maybe respectfully disagree with Majority Floor Leader that Wyoming law doesn't seem to affect federal law in a lot of things. Our fencing law is one example. One of the things I've been involved in this domestic bighorn sheep working group since its inception. And one of the things you'll notice in there is that there's very little participation by the federal agencies. And that's because they'll tell you they can't be bound by agreements by the folks here. I don't disagree that the folks in the wildlife community have been very supportive of the domestic sheep and the domestic agriculture. However, I think the biggest problem in this is indeed the federal government. The last thing I just want to mention is that the concerns about having to open up the Lander RMP, I think we all have to worry about what that could result in. And well, I see I'm getting close to my 2 minutes, so Madam Chairman, I'll stop there unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Hamilton? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you very much for your testimony. Go ahead and let the other person in.
Madam Chairman, Laura Pearson.
Go ahead. Please introduce yourself. And like I said, we're just going to go with 2 minutes. And so feel free to get started.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Laura Tolliver Pearson. I am a sheep rancher in Southwest Wyoming. That being said, and realizing that this bill doesn't necessarily affect our operation, I feel the need to testify on it in defense of the sheep operations up there. I am in support of this bill, but not the introduction of the bighorn, as I believe there is an alternative agenda similar to the wolf introduction. Bighorn populations have devastated livestock producers in surrounding states. And let us not forget that wildlife do not obey fence lines or release areas. Once again, I'm in support of this bill as we need to get ahead of this. That's pretty much all I have to say. You've heard the testimony of the wool growers and the members that are associated with that and their fears. And I express the same fears as far as the BLM and the federal government is concerned. I believe that there's severe overreach in our state. And thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee for Ms. Pearson? Okay, thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no other testimony from anyone, I think we'll close testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure on this bill? Okay, it's been moved by Senator Ellis, seconded by Senator Jones. Amendments or?
Madam
We've
Chair.
got some already, but do you have any others?
Madam Chair, I don't know how we should proceed with the amendments. When I tried tracking them in, this bill gets real messy real fast. I don't think I want to adopt every amendment that was presented by Senator Hicks, so I would reject a motion to adopt them in total. I don't know if we want to go page by page. I can tell you there are some amendments I would like to offer, particularly on the intervention, just to tighten it up, because I think there are concerns of how it's drafted now. So I don't know, Madam Chair, if we would want to take some of the amendments adopted or offered by Senator Hicks, you know, the cooperative review area, I mean, we could clean that up. And then another alternative would be to do as much work as we want to, and then ask the bringer of the bill to, anything we have missed, bring in a committee of the whole amendment.
Yeah.
I just think it's too much for us to tackle it all in that, given the short time we have.
How the
We
rest
have
of you
a
feel?
duty to do good work, and I don't feel like I'm going to do great work in 20 minutes. And the next bill we have is really, really important too.
Rest of the committee, how do you feel?
Should we ask a bringer of the bill if he's willing to do that?
Senator Hicks, why don't you come forward and give us your thoughts on this?
Madam Chairman, I've got a lot of thoughts on this, so I don't want to run in, but if there was some specific questions that I could help address.
Madam
Go
Chair?
ahead, Senator Ellis.
For example, the new paragraph B, Romanet 2, that you asked us to adopt, the changes to the US BLM resource management plans or is it allotment management plans, that's not resolved. I don't know how to fix that on the fly. And there are some typos and things in there. I think a committee of the whole amendment, I think brought by you would be impactful. I'm just trying to think of how we get through the next few minutes, knowing we have another really critical bill we've got to work before we gavel in. I'm just trying to figure out how we can take all of these amendments and discuss them and vet them like we should as a committee.
Majority Floor Leader, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I can certainly bring those as committee of the whole, but you guys understand the complicated, anything that you could do at this point in time as a standing committee helps move this thing along from a standpoint of clarifying, spending different times on specific issues. And so specifically, it is allotment management plans. Those are what are renewed every 10 years under their grazing plan. The permittees sign off on those. The RMP is a whole separate issue. I don't want to go into how this bill would trigger under an RMP versus an AMP or a grazing agreement. But this language was provide the most, even this language would provide protection for those permittees under an RMP. Because it would trigger removal of the sheep. Madam Chairman, I think that's the one thing that there's some concerns about is just, this bill is preemptive, and it's designed to be preemptive instead of reactive. And in the past, because we were reacting to situations that had already occurred or were in the process. This is preemptive. And it's designed to do that on a purpose, to say there is absolutely no threat to those livestock grazing permittees, period. Because it is prospective that if the agency initiates an action, keep in mind this is the federal government that can't take any action, and it takes, like on RMP, usually 10 to 15 years to get one done. Allotment management plans happen a little faster every 10 years, but even that is conducted through NEPA analysis that takes upwards of 6 months to conduct those. So it is prospective for that very purpose, to address those issues, that there is no damage to those livestock grazers. In a case where if it wasn't in the other cases, you could have a federal decision, they're gone. And then we have to remove the sheep and then fight to get all those grazing restrictions back, or authorizations back in place. So for that very reason, it is different. But Madam Chairman, if you guys could even just do the conforming amendments, some of that, it would be helpful as far as moving this through the floor and a committee of the whole.
I think we could do that.
Any of the more substantives like that, if you want to leave that for a committee of the whole, but just some of the clarifications, the little additions here and there, if you could get through those, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So do we have a motion to do just that from committee? Oh, yeah, we can do that, sure. Well, let's just work the bill then. Let's just start with page 1. Yes, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I move on page 1, line 4, we strike herd unit and insert cooperative review area.
Okay.
Along those lines, to maybe speed this along, I would also include in that motion on page 3, line 17, strike herd unit to another area of the state and insert cooperative review area. I think the other one, Madam Chair, is on page 4, line 9. Strike herd unit and insert the language. And then I think again on page 7, line 15, And I think that's it, Madam Chair, that's the motion.
Any discussion on the motion? Discussion? Second. Okay, second. All those in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Did you get that, Kelly?
Madam Chairman, is there also an amendment on page 6, line 9? Sweetwater Rocks Cooperative.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd amend my motion if there's no objection with the committee.
Yes, let's go ahead and do that. Okay. Any other motions? Yes. Okay. Any motion on that?
Madam Chair, I move July 1st, 2024.
Okay. We have a motion by Senator Ellis to change that date, and a second by Senator Jones. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Same. Okay. It's been approved.
Madam Chair, do you want to do it in page order? Mine are I have paid amendments to offer in 4 and 5.
Sure, let's do that.
On page 4, Madam Chair, starting on line 22, I would move to strike or file an amicus curiae brief, going on to 23, and then leave in the words in any lawsuit, and then strike the balance of the line on page 4, line 23. Going over to page 5, striking all of line 1, line 2, and then on line 3 up to negatively impact, and insert right there, if a federal action is contrary to. That's my first motion, Madam Chair. So the paragraph would then read, with the approval of the governor, the attorney general shall seek to intervene in any lawsuit if federal action is contrary to the state's policy regarding Wyoming bighorn, domestic sheep, et cetera.
Did you get that, Kelly? Okay.
And Madam Chair, the reason I say this is an amicus brief, if for the severity of this issue, those are sometimes read, sometimes not. I think if we're going to try and be forceful, we say we're going to seek to intervene. And along those lines, courts look to see what our interest is in intervention. There's a whole test that they employ. We write briefs on that all the time. And I think it's a little convoluted when we talk about having to defend other grazing permittees' interests. I think that really confuses it because courts will look to see what our interest is. I also struck the filed in any state or federal court in Wyoming because sometimes these actions are brought in the District of Columbia federal court. So I'm trying to help. That's the intent of the motion.
Anything else
On that,
on that?
no.
Okay. Discussion on the amendment? Okay. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that amendment's passed.
Madam Chair, on
Anything
page
else?
5,
Okay.
line 9, and strike the may and insert shall. At the end of line 9, strike in, and then on the line 10, any state or federal court. That's just unnecessary language. And then I'd say, let's just leave it at that. Say to stop. I don't like that word, but we'll leave it in there. And then on page 5, line 13, strike in the Attorney General's judgment. I think that's redundant language. And then on line 15, the last part is, and then going on to 16, 17, 18, and 19, strike all that language and insert in its place, or is otherwise contrary to law. And that's the motion. If there's a second, I'll explain why I think this language will help the intention of the bill.
There's a second by Senator Baldwin. Okay. Discussion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just following along with the shall, obviously this is at the, request of the governor, so there's the discretion. Saying any state or federal court's redundant. I don't think we're filing actions in any other country. I think with the language on lines 16 through 17, 18, and 19, we're talking about NEPA. If the federal agency isn't complying with NEPA, those would be the arguments, is somehow they violated NEPA or the Administrative Procedures Act. So if we're trying to make some argument that it's inconsistent, I just think that weakens our argument. So if it's contrary to law, they violated the law, then that's when we bring in action.
Okay. Any other discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor of those amendments, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Okay, that is passed. Any others? From anyone? No?
Madam Chair, I wonder if we've gone far enough for Senator Hicks.
Are we good, Senator Hicks?
Madam Chair, the only thing I would agree with most of those until it comes up to the last proposed amendment, because not all of these necessarily would be a NEPA action, because a lot of these are just BLM policies that have already in place, so there was really no action, and that's what we tried to get to with the instructional memo and the handbooks. Those are documents that are already in place, so it's not necessarily federal action under NEPA. Those are existing, and that's the BLM Rule 1730 that we contemplate in there. And then that language that says the management policy, that's consistent with the BLM Rule 1730 in their handbook, where it says that they have to do early and timely communication, cooperation, and coordination with the state agency. So that is a pre-requirement under those BLM rules before they implement a NEPA action. So I'd be curious.
Is that something we could do at a committee of the whole?
Yeah, I
Leave it
would,
in?
I would ask right now just to hold back that part of Senator Ellis's amendment, and I'll work with her on there and get some language for a committee of the whole amendment.
Madam Chair, no, I don't want to withdraw it. I think this is where we're going to have a little bit of a meeting of the minds. I mean, it's like one policy compared to one handbook. We can only bring lawsuits when there's a violation of law. So, if we wanted to make the argument that this handbook somehow is contrary to some other handbook or other requirement by the BLM, there's an argument that they violated their own laws. So I think it's covered, but we can talk about that further, but I don't want to withdraw the motion.
Well, let's go ahead and leave it in, and then Senator, Majority Floor Leader, you can also, excuse me?
What do you guys think?
Oh, sorry.
Then we could go ahead and change, if you have some possible changes, committee of the whole, so. All right, did we vote on that amendment? Okay, we did, all right. So any others? Are we good? I think we're running out of time, so I think, are we ready for the question on the bill? Okay, question's being called.
Senate File 118, Bighorn and Domestic Sheep Relocation Federal Action, Senator Baldwin.
Aye.
Senator Ellis.
Aye.
Senator Guru.
He left a proxy for aye.
Senator Jones. Chairman Schuler.
Aye.
5 ayes.
Okay, that bill is passed. Yeah, will you excuse us? Because we're going to be a little bit late. Okay. All right, thank you. All right, next up, thank you very much for all the testimony. Our last bill, save the best for last, right? Welcome, Director.
Good morning, committee members. Charles Moore, the Director of the Wyoming Gaming Commission. Knowing we don't have any time, how do you want to proceed?
Well, I think, Director, that you've done a lot of work on this bill, and I think if you just give us a quick overview, and if the committee has any questions, we'll throw
Thank you,
those out.
Chairwoman. Senate File 125, Pari-Mutuel Activity Amendments. Senate File 25 is a direct response to concerns raised October 27, 2021, when the U.S. Department of Justice notified the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigations of the concern with current law surrounding the Wyoming Gaming Commission's ability to conduct national criminal history record checks. The U.S. Department of Justice, the CJIS unit, determined that Wyoming Statutes 1125-104 does not meet the requirements of Public Law 92-544. The terms participant and participant who is directly involved are overly broad and not defined by statutes. So I think that we don't need to get into the timeline at this point. I do know that President Driscoll did leave an amendment to the bill on page 3, line 18. He had asked that I let you know that he would like to change the shall to a may. Otherwise, I'll stand for questions at this point, I think.
Questions for the Director? I know you've done a lot of work on this, Director, and so we welcome to our co-chair, who's also worked on this with, she's the liaison for the House, for the Gaming Commission, so Representative, anything that you'd like to add?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In interest of time, no.
Yes, Senator Ellis.
Madam Chair, I think my biggest concern with the bill, and I'm looking at the definitions, and the director knows I had some concerns about those definitions. I think they're getting tighter. What we see before us, these are accurate descriptions of the positions, but the omission is what has me most concerned. It's on the skill-based amusement side, we have requirements for who the machine vendors are and who owns the building where the machines are located. And I don't know why to me, that's a really significant part of this operation. That's where the big money is flowing. I don't know why those terms weren't defined and included in this list.
Chairwoman Schuler, Senator
Director.
Ellis, thank you for the question. With parimutuel wagering, if you're permitted to operate live race meet, you then apply for the simulcasting in the HHR, the story course racing that we have in our state. So with that, those folks are already covered and under our current structure. So on page 6, we have the host facility license on line 10 and 12. Host facility means a person who leases their property for a permit holder to operate or host parimutuel wagering. That covers the locations where the HHRs, and that's what we have been doing in the past. We've been doing that. Excuse me, the employees at those locations. On page 7, mutual employees, those also cover the individuals that are working at the off-track wagering locations. Again, it's because it's parimutuel. Moving on down that same page, 5, 6, and 7, mutual manager. Those are the managers of those locations. Then if you move down on page 7, 16 through 21, that also includes, those are the service providers. Those are the terminal owners or the businesses that operate the terminals, provide those services to the state of Wyoming, to the operators, and those are covered as well. Then if you turn over to page 8, line 5 through 7, a permit holder. The permit holder is the owner of the business. Those are the folks that are running the operations, and that includes the racetrack and the off-track wagering locations. On page 9, on line 21 through 23, service provider. Again, that's inclusive of both of those operations. Hope that answers your question.
Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That does. Thank you.
Having a hard time keeping my green button. Any other questions for the director or for Representative?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I do have another concern, and it has to do with the grounds of denial, and we talked about this. When we met and talked, the TRW committee talked with you in October, I asked if there were the rules that we have for online sports wagering and skill games that say if you have certain elements on your criminal background, if those applied to the parimutuel world, how many licenses or permits would you need to pull? And the response I got from you was 15 to 20, and that has me really concerned. I know the governor's office has pointed to other areas of statute that say any agency can deny licenses if they have a reasonable basis. And so we're looking at that external statute right now, but it hasn't clearly been used because I think we've got people with criminal backgrounds getting licenses and permits. So I'm wondering, I'm just struggling with this. I think we're giving permits and licenses to people who probably shouldn't have them, in my view. Do you have a solution for that, or what's going on? Can you give us an update?
Director?
Chairman Schuler, Senator Ellis, thank you for the question. Under Wyoming, in Title 33, we have a requirement, and that's part of the reason why we have Maze, that views all of these applicants. So, and again, I don't have it all in front of me, so excuse me if I'm a little vague. We have look back 10 to 20 years. So beyond that point in time, an individual pursuant to our statutes, we cannot consider that. So we do need to look at this. If there is a change that needs to be done, we need to look at the Title 33, and we need to look at our statutes and try to marry those together or eliminate part of that would be the solution.
Follow up?
Madam Chair, this to me seems just as an immediate of a concern as the need for this bill. And so when does that happen? We don't do anything this session and then this gets passed and then I just fear like we merrily keep letting people with serious criminal activities on their background get gaming licenses. What's going to happen if tighten that up? Do you need statute?
Chairman Schuler, Senator Ellis, again, thank you. We do need some statute changes if that's the direction that this body wants to go. However, we are also in the process of currently looking at our Chapter 7 rules and doing a tiered approach to the licensing, and we'll have that presented to the commission in a rule change potentially here in the next 2 months.
Any other questions for the director or representative? No? Okay. I think this gets us where we need to get to be. Yes, Representative Newsom. Okay. Thanks for coming. I guess we should have put this one first. I think we could have probably knocked it out of the park. Yes, we should have. I let the majority floor leader talk me into changing the order, so. Any other questions for the director? Okay. Anyone in the room that would like to provide some testimony? Appreciate all the work there, Director. I think you've done a yeoman's work on this, so. Oh, we do have one. Come on up, come forward. Please introduce yourself, even though we know you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Frank Lamb, Wyoming Downs. I'll be very quick. Just want to support the amendment. And I think that gives our commission some ability to use common sense in these issues. There's in the bill ahead of where that shall is, there's a may. It says that they may fingerprint for identification purposes. Later on, there's a may that says that the DCI may share the information that they get. So it only makes sense to me that this one should be a may instead of a shall. And I'll give you a real quick example. There are, well, when I was 10 years old, I owned a racehorse. And I don't think that would have been a real good time to be fingerprinting somebody when they're 10 years old. And it's legitimate.
Yeah, sure.
And there are other circumstances as well. So I just in support of that amendment.
Thank you. Questions for, no? Okay. Oh, whoops. Senator Ellis?
Madam Chair, I think that's my concern, though, is on page 4, line 4, the division may share the results of the criminal background check with the commission. We went through that whole exercise of getting the background check. The decision maker on whether or not to grant the license isn't the Division of Criminal Investigations, it's the commission. So shouldn't they shall look at that? That's why I don't understand the mays versus shalls. I think we should be leaning a little bit more to shalls on some of this stuff.
Mr. Lamb, anything that you would want to add on that?
Well, I was the director of the Parimutuel Commission when we had that current statute as the may instead of the shall. I don't recall any circumstance where the DCI did not share the information, but I understand Senator Ellis's concern.
So, Mr. Lamb, if I just want to be clear, if I were to propose an amendment that changes page 4, line 4, the may to a shall, is that something your organization would support? Or would, I just get nervous about people who say things in this committee and then when we go upstairs, the tune changes. And I want to avoid that situation. So that's an amendment I'm looking at. Would you support that, if that's the practice?
I don't have page
4.
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, I don't have page numbers on it, but is that the DCI may?
The Division of Criminal Investigation shall share the results.
We would have no problem with that.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the room who wants to provide testimony? Okay. All right, with that, we'll close public testimony. What's your pleasure on this bill? Committee? Okay. Senator Baldwin made the motion. Okay. Second by Senator Jones. Any amendments?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
In the interest of time, I don't have it prepared. I actually had something else prepared, but in light of the information we received, I'm going to hold off on providing you what I had drafted up. But I think, just as for the committee's knowledge, I do think we need to make sure that we direct the commission to adopt by rule grounds for denying applications. I'm just sick to my stomach thinking that people with severe things on their criminal background records are currently getting licenses in Wyoming, and other statutory provisions haven't worked, and I think that this is something that has to be addressed sooner rather than later.
Do you want to change a may to a shall?
Unfortunately, there's not a place may to a shall in here for me to do that objective, but if you wanted to get after, the other requested may to shall, I'll leave someone else to do that.
Okay. No other potential amendments then? Okay. A question on the bill? Let's go ahead and take roll.
Madam Chairman, this is Senate File 125, Pari-Mutual Wagering Activities Amendments. Senator Baldwin.
Aye.
Senator Ellis.
Aye.
Senator Guru.
He left a proxy for aye.
Senator Jones. Chairman Schuler.
Aye.
5 ayes.
Okay, thank you. That bill is passed. I guess we'll let probably Senator Driscoll carry that, wouldn't you guess, on the floor? Okay. Thanks, everyone, for your testimony. Sorry we ran out of time.
I want to know which map is better.
I guess they are. It's all important, you're right.
I want a committee to see which map was better.
I like your map
That's nice,
a
Fred.
lot.
I know this one's more colorful,
Fred's got a great map.
but my map was better, much more detailed.
Oh, I can tell.
I won't be up in the gallery today, but if you need anything,
Where are you gonna be?
I'm just gonna be down.